The autumn sun cast golden streaks across the sprawling lawn of the Ashford estate, where 200 guests sat beneath silk canopies, their champagne flutes catching the light like tiny diamonds. Seraphina Blackwell stood at the entrance of the garden venue in her custom Vera Wang gown, a vision of ivory lace and triumph, when she heard the sound that would shatter her perfect day into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The low, powerful purr of an engine. Not just any engine. The unmistakable rumble of exclusivity, of wealth so profound it didn't need to announce itself, yet somehow still did. Every head turned toward the circular driveway. Seraphina's fingers tightened around her bouquet of white peonies until her knuckles went pale. Her fiancé, Kenton Ashford III, placed a hand on the small of her back, his brow furrowing with confusion. The wedding planner, clipboard in hand, looked frantically between her watch and the procession schedule, clearly thrown off by this unexpected arrival. Then they saw it. A Rolls-Royce boat tail glided into view like a yacht on wheels, its metallic champagne exterior catching the sunlight in a way that seemed almost ethereal. The vehicle was a masterpiece, one of only 3 in existence, worth $28 million. Seraphina knew this because she'd once watched a documentary about it with Thaddeus on their threadbare couch in their tiny apartment, back when they could barely afford cable. Back when he'd laughed and said, "One day, maybe in another lifetime." The car came to a gentle stop. The rear doors opened with mechanical precision, and 3 small figures emerged. Triplets, 2 boys and a girl, no more than 4 years old, dressed in matching ivory and gold outfits that coordinated perfectly with the wedding's color scheme. They were beautiful children, with dark curls and bright, intelligent eyes that scanned the crowd with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Then he stepped out. Thaddeus Mercer emerged from the Rolls-Royce like a man reborn. Gone was the worn-out construction worker who'd left her life 3 years ago with nothing but a duffel bag and shattered dreams. In his place stood a figure of such refined elegance that Seraphina actually felt her breath catch. He wore a midnight blue Tom Ford suit that fit him like it had been painted onto his now athletic frame. A Patek Philippe watch glinted at his wrist. His once unkempt hair was now styled with casual precision, and his beard was trimmed to highlight the strong jawline she'd forgotten he possessed. But it was his eyes that destroyed her. Those same hazel eyes she'd looked into on their wedding day 7 years ago, when she'd promised forever in a courthouse ceremony that cost them $47. Those eyes that had pleaded with her to stay when the eviction notice came. Those eyes that had gone dead when she'd signed the divorce papers and told him she deserved better than a life of poverty. Those eyes now looked at her with nothing. No anger, no pain, no recognition of the woman who'd abandoned him. Just a polite, distant acknowledgement, as if she were a stranger whose path he'd crossed accidentally. Seraphina felt the world tilt beneath her designer heels. 3 years earlier, their story had been so different. Thaddeus had been a construction worker, putting in 70-hour weeks to keep them afloat in their cramped studio apartment in South Philadelphia. Seraphina had worked as a receptionist at a dental office, her business degree gathering dust because entry-level positions in her field didn't pay enough to justify the daycare costs they'd need if she took one. They'd been married for 4 years by then, and every single one of those years had been a grinding battle against bills, against debt, against the relentless weight of never having enough. She could still remember the exact moment she'd decided to leave. It was a Tuesday evening in March. Thaddeus had come home with plaster dust in his hair and exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Their electricity had been shut off that morning. They were eating peanut butter sandwiches by candlelight, and he'd tried to make a joke about it being romantic. She'd looked at him across that rickety table, at his calloused hands and his hopeful smile, and something inside her had simply broken. "I can't do this anymore," she'd whispered. The hope had drained from his face like water from a broken glass. "Sarah, I'm working on something. I have an idea, a business plan. Just give me 6 more months." "You've been saying that for 3 years, Thaddeus." Her voice had been cold, measured. She'd been practicing the words for weeks. "I'm 29 years old. I want a life. I want to go to restaurants without calculating the tip 3 times. I want to buy clothes that aren't from thrift stores. I want to stop choosing between groceries and heat. I'll work harder. I'll pick up weekend shifts. You already work 7 days a week." The words had exploded from her. "And we're still drowning. I'm drowning, Thad. I'm suffocating in this poverty, and I can't breathe anymore." He'd stood up then, come around the table to her. His hands, rough from labor, had cupped her face with such gentleness. "I love you. We promised each other forever, for better or worse. Remember?" She'd pulled away from his touch. "I was 22 when I made that promise. I didn't know what worse meant. I didn't know it would be this endless." The divorce had taken 3 months. Thaddeus hadn't fought it. He'd signed every paper she'd put in front of him with steady hands and hollow eyes. She'd taken half of their nothing, which amounted to a 12-year-old Honda Civic and $1,700 from their savings account. He'd kept the apartment and the debt. The last time she'd seen him was in the parking lot of the courthouse after their final hearing. He'd stood beside that old Honda, his hands in the pockets of his only suit, the same one he'd worn to their wedding. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah," he'd said quietly. "I hope it makes you happy." She'd driven away without looking back, telling herself she felt relief. She'd told herself that for weeks, even as she moved into a slightly nicer apartment, even as she started dating again, even as she met Kenton Ashford III at a charity gala her friend had dragged her to. Kenton was everything Thaddeus wasn't. Old money, Yale-educated, connected. He'd pursued her with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. And Seraphina had let herself be swept up in a world of country clubs and theater boxes and summer homes in the Hamptons. When he'd proposed after 8 months, she'd said yes without hesitation. Planning the wedding had been Kenton's mother's domain, and Delphine Ashford did everything at a grand scale. 200 guests, the Ashford estate, a dress that cost more than Seraphina's annual salary at the dental office. It was everything Seraphina had ever dreamed of, everything she'd sacrificed her marriage to Thaddeus to find. And then, 6 weeks before the wedding, Kenton had made a suggestion that seemed harmless at the time. They'd been having dinner at Le Bernardin, and he'd been scrolling through her social media over dessert. "Who's this?" he'd asked, turning his phone to show her a tagged photo from years ago. "Thaddeus." Smiling at the camera, his arm around her shoulders at some friend's barbecue. "My ex-husband," she'd said casually, cutting into her crème brûlée. Kenton's eyebrows had risen. "You were married before?" "For 4 years. It didn't work out." He'd studied the photo with clinical interest. "He looks rather ordinary." "He was a construction worker. We were very young." She'd sipped her wine, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Does he know you're getting married?" "I doubt it. We haven't spoken since the divorce." Kenton had set down his phone, a strange smile playing at his lips. "You should invite him." Seraphina had nearly choked on her wine. "What? Why would I do that?" "Because it would be delicious." His eyes had glittered with something she couldn't quite name. "Think about it, darling. Your ex-husband. Probably still struggling in whatever blue-collar existence he's living, watching you marry into one of Philadelphia's oldest families. It's a perfect demonstration of how far you've come." "That's cruel, Kenton." "Is it?" He'd leaned back in his chair, swirling his scotch. "You left him because he couldn't provide for you. You chose ambition over sentiment. There's no shame in that. Why not celebrate your success? Besides, I'd like to meet the man who had you first and lost you. There's a certain poetry in it." Seraphina had laughed nervously. "He won't come. Why would he subject himself to that?" "Then there's no harm in sending the invitation, is there?" She should have said no. Should have recognized the cruelty in the suggestion, the pettiness that lurked beneath Kenton's cultivated sophistication. But there'd been something intoxicating about the idea, something that fed a dark part of her that wanted Thaddeus to see exactly what he'd missed, what his poverty had cost him. So she'd sent the invitation. She'd addressed it to his old apartment, not knowing if he even still lived there. The envelope had been heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing. The invitation itself was a work of art, announcing the union of Seraphina Blackwell and Kenton Ashford III at the Ashford estate. She'd included a handwritten note on her personal stationery. "Thaddeus, I thought you might like to celebrate this happy occasion with me. I hope life has been kind to you. Warmly, Seraphina." Warmly. The word had felt like acid on her tongue as she'd written it, but she'd told herself this was about closure, about showing him she harbored no ill will. Even as she secretly hoped he'd see the venue, the family name, the obvious display of wealth, and feel the full weight of what he'd lost. She'd never expected him to actually come, and she certainly never expected this. Now, standing in her wedding gown, as Thaddeus approached with 3 beautiful children in tow, Seraphina felt reality fracturing around her. The guests were murmuring, their heads turning between the unexpected arrival and the bride, sensing drama, the way sharks sense blood in water. Kenton's hand had gone rigid on her back, his politician's smile frozen on his face. Thaddeus walked toward them with unhurried grace, the triplets flanking him like small, well-dressed guards. As he got closer, Seraphina could see the details she'd missed from a distance. The children weren't just dressed well. They wore tiny designer outfits that probably cost more than her wedding dress. The little girl had a strand of pearls around her neck that looked disturbingly real. The boys had matching pocket squares that coordinated with their father's tie. "Seraphina," Thaddeus said when he reached them, his voice smooth and cultured in a way she didn't remember. Had he always sounded like this? Or had poverty roughened him in ways she'd forgotten? "Thank you for the invitation. I apologize for arriving slightly early. My pilot misjudged the traffic from the airstrip." His pilot. His airstrip. The words hit her like physical blows. Kenton stepped forward, extending his hand with practiced charm, though Seraphina could see the tension in his jaw. "Kenton Ashford, I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Thaddeus Mercer." They shook hands, and Seraphina noticed her ex-husband's grip was firm but brief, the handshake of a man who had nothing to prove. "Congratulations on your wedding. Seraphina is a remarkable woman. You're a fortunate man." The words were perfectly polite, perfectly appropriate, and somehow devastating in their complete lack of emotion. The little girl tugged on Thaddeus's sleeve. "Daddy, you said there would be cake." "Daddy!" The word detonated in Seraphina's chest like a grenade. Her eyes shot to the children, really looking at them for the first time. They were beautiful, yes, but there was something familiar about their features, something in the shape of their eyes and the curve of their smiles that made her heart stop. They looked like Thaddeus, but they also looked like someone else, someone she couldn't quite place. Thaddeus smiled down at the little girl, and it was a smile Seraphina had never seen him give her, not even in their best days. It was pure, uncomplicated love. "Soon, Meadow. We need to wait for the ceremony first." "But I'm hungry now," one of the boys whined. "Calloway, we discussed this," Thaddeus said gently but firmly. "What did we agree about patience?" The boy sighed dramatically. that good things come to those who wait. Exactly. Now, can you and your brother find our seats while I speak with the bride? The other boy, who Seraphina assumed was the third triplet, looked up at her with disconcerting directness. You're very pretty. Daddy said you were pretty. He was right. Seraphina felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't have said why. Thank you. What's your name? Hawthorne. I'm 4 3/4. That's Calloway, and that's Meadow. We're triplets, but I'm the oldest by 6 minutes. That's wonderful, she managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. A woman appeared then, seemingly from nowhere. She was young, perhaps 25, with kind eyes and an efficient manner. Come along, darlings. Let's find our seats and let Daddy talk to his friends. The triplets obediently followed the woman toward the seating area, and Seraphina watched them go with a sense of unreality that made her feel like she was watching this scene from outside her own body. Your children are beautiful, Kenton said, and there was something sharp beneath his pleasant tone. Their mother must be quite lovely. Thaddeus's expression didn't change. She was. She passed away 18 months ago. The words hung in the air like smoke. Seraphina felt her mouth open, but no sound came out. Passed away. He'd lost someone. He'd had a whole life, a whole family, while she'd been planning this wedding, choosing flowers, obsessing over place cards. I'm so sorry, Kenton said, and for once he sounded genuinely sincere. That must have been devastating. It was, but we manage. Children are resilient. Thaddeus turned to Seraphina, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been amusement or might have been pity. I wanted to thank you personally for the invitation, Sarah. When I got it, I almost didn't come, but then I thought about what Evangeline would have said. Evangeline? Seraphina whispered. My late wife. She was always better than me, you know. Kinder, more forgiving. She would have said that you reaching out was an act of grace, that you wanted to make peace with the past. So I'm here to honor that gesture. He paused, and his next words were so quiet only she could hear them. Unless, of course, that wasn't your intention at all. Seraphina felt her face flush hot with shame. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd always been able to read her, even when she was lying to herself. Before she could respond, the wedding planner rushed over, her professional mask barely concealing her panic. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we really need to begin the ceremony. The minister has another engagement this evening. Of course, Thaddeus said smoothly. I'll take my seat. Again, congratulations to you both. He walked away, leaving Seraphina standing there with her fiancé and her shame. Kenton leaned close to her ear. Well, this should be interesting. Your poor ex-husband certainly landed on his feet, didn't he? But Seraphina barely heard him. She was watching Thaddeus settle into a seat in the 3rd row, the triplets climbing into the chairs beside him. The little girl, Meadow, said something that made him laugh, and the sound carried across the lawn like music. That laugh. She'd forgotten that laugh. She'd forgotten so many things. The string quartet began to play, and Delphine Ashford appeared to escort Seraphina to the top of the aisle. Are you ready, darling? Her future mother-in-law asked, her voice tight with barely suppressed curiosity about the dramatic arrival. Seraphina nodded numbly, letting herself be positioned. The guests rose, the music swelled. She began her walk down the aisle toward Kenton, who stood at the altar looking confident and handsome, and suddenly like a stranger. As she passed the 3rd row, her eyes met Thaddeus's for just a moment. And in that moment, she saw everything she'd thrown away, everything she'd convinced herself didn't matter, everything she'd traded for security and status, and this perfect wedding to a man whose mother had chosen her dress. The minister began to speak, but Seraphina couldn't hear the words over the roaring in her ears. She was getting married. This was what she wanted. This was what she'd left Thaddeus to find. So why did she suddenly feel like she was making the biggest mistake of her life? And how had Thaddeus, her poor ex-husband, who couldn't even keep their electricity on, arrived at her wedding in a $28 million car with 3 children who wore pearls? What had happened in the 3 years since she'd left him? The ceremony passed in a blur of words Seraphina couldn't process. She said, "I do," when prompted, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. Kenton slipped a 6-carat diamond ring onto her finger, and it felt heavy, suffocating. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kenton kissed her with the confidence of ownership, and the guests erupted in applause. All except Thaddeus, she noticed. He simply stood with the others, his hands empty of champagne, his face pleasantly neutral. The triplets clapped enthusiastically, clearly delighted by the spectacle, their small hands creating a sound that somehow cut through the roar of 200 guests. The reception began immediately after, the guests flowing from the ceremony lawn to the grand ballroom the Ashfords had constructed specifically for events like this. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Ice sculptures depicting swans slowly melted at the center of tables laden with orchids and roses. A 12-piece orchestra played while waiters circulated with trays of beluga caviar and Dom Perignon. Seraphina moved through it all like an automaton, smiling for photographs, accepting congratulations, her eyes constantly searching the crowd for Thaddeus. She spotted him finally, standing near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the estate's lake. The triplets were with their nanny at a table near the back, coloring in activity books someone had thoughtfully provided. Though Seraphina suspected the Ashford wedding planner hadn't anticipated children at this event. She should have been with Kenton, making their rounds, thanking guests for coming. Instead, she found her feet carrying her toward her ex-husband, drawn by a force she couldn't name, and didn't want to examine too closely. "Thaddeus," she said when she reached him. He turned, and up close she could see details she'd missed before. Faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago, a small scar above his left eyebrow, the subtle scent of an expensive cologne she didn't recognize. He'd changed in ways that went beyond clothes and cars. "Seraphina," he acknowledged. "Beautiful ceremony? The minister's words about partnership and sacrifice were quite moving." There was no bite in his tone, no sarcasm, which somehow made it worse. He was being genuine, which meant he either didn't remember the bitter fights they'd had about sacrifice, about how she'd felt like she was the only one sacrificing, or he'd moved so far past it that those memories no longer held any power over him. "I need to know," she blurted out, abandoning all pretense of small talk. "What happened to you after the divorce? How did you—" She gestured vaguely at him, at the window where his Rolls-Royce was still visible in the circular drive, at everything he'd become. Thaddeus was quiet for a moment, studying her with those hazel eyes that saw too much. "Are you sure you want to know? Today is your wedding day, Sarah. Maybe some stories are better left untold." "Please," she whispered, and hated how desperate she sounded. He sighed, turning back to look out the window at the lake. "Do you remember the business plan I mentioned? The one I asked you to give me 6 more months for?" She nodded, shame creeping up her spine like poison ivy. It was a design for a new type of foundation system for buildings in flood-prone areas. I'd been working on it for 2 years, sketching during lunch breaks, researching at the library because we couldn't afford internet at home. I'd finally gotten it to a place where I thought it might actually work, might actually be worth something. Seraphina's breath caught. She did remember, vaguely. He'd tried to show her drawings once, but she'd been so tired, so worn down by another day of answering phones and dodging calls from creditors that she'd barely looked at them. "After you left, I had nothing to lose anymore," Thaddeus continued, his voice matter-of-fact. "So I took the $1,700 from our savings, the half you'd left me, and I filed for a patent. Then I borrowed money from everyone I could find. My foreman lent me $3,000. My buddy from high school gave me $2,000. I maxed out a credit card with a 29% interest rate. I put together a prototype using scrap materials from construction sites." He paused, and Seraphina could hear the orchestra transitioning to a waltz. Couples were beginning to fill the dance floor. She should have been out there with Kenton for their first dance. Instead, she stood frozen, listening to the story of what her absence had created. "I entered it in an innovation competition for sustainable construction. I didn't expect anything. The other entries were from MIT graduates and established engineering firms. I was a construction worker with a high school diploma and a folder full of hand-drawn sketches. But somehow, I won. The prize was $50,000 and a meeting with venture capitalists." "Thaddeus," Seraphina breathed, but he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I used the prize money to build a better prototype and start a company, Mercer Foundation Systems. The VCs were interested but cautious. Then Hurricane Helena hit the Gulf Coast 8 months after our divorce. Remember that?" She nodded. It had been all over the news. Entire neighborhoods destroyed, billions in damage. My system could have prevented a lot of that damage. One of the VCs saw the news coverage and realized what I'd been trying to tell them. Within a week, I had $3 million in funding. Within 6 months, I had contracts with developers in Florida, Louisiana, Texas. Within a year, I'd sold the patent to an international construction consortium for $97 million. The number hit Seraphina like a physical blow. $97 million. While she'd been dating Kenton, while she'd been choosing wedding invitations, and arguing with Delphine about flower arrangements, Thaddeus had become a multi-millionaire from the idea she'd been too exhausted and resentful to even look at properly. "I met Evangeline at a charity gala the company threw after the sale," Thaddeus said, and his voice softened in a way that made Seraphina's chest ache. "She was a pediatric nurse, volunteering at the event. She didn't know who I was or what I was worth. She just saw me standing alone at the bar looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo, and she came over and made a joke about the ice sculpture looking like a deformed penguin." Despite everything, Seraphina felt tears prick her eyes. She could picture it perfectly. Thaddeus had always been awkward at formal events, had always gravitated toward the people who seemed as out of place as he felt. "We dated for 3 months before I told her about the money. By then, she'd already decided she loved me," she said. "The money didn't matter to her. She'd grown up in foster care, bounced between 12 different homes before she aged out of the system. She said family was the only wealth that mattered." His voice cracked almost imperceptibly. "We got married at a small church in Vermont. 20 people. Her friends from the hospital, my old crew from construction. It cost us $800 total, and it was perfect." Seraphina felt something inside her crumble. Perfect. He'd found perfect with someone else, something better than what they'd had, while she'd spent 3 years chasing status and security. "The triplets came a year later," Thaddeus continued. "Multiple pregnancy, high risk. Evangeline was on bed rest for 5 months. I sat with her every day, reading to her, bringing her terrible homemade meals because the doctor said restaurant food had too much sodium. When they were born, Hawthorne, Callaway, and Meadow, all healthy despite being 6 weeks early, Evangeline cried and said it was a miracle. She said we'd been given 3 times the blessing." "What happened to her?" Seraphina asked, though part of her didn't want to know, couldn't bear to know. "Brain aneurysm. No warning, no symptoms. She was reading the Triplets a bedtime story about a dragon and a princess, and then she just stopped, collapsed right there in the nursery. She was gone before the ambulance arrived." his hands clenched on the windowsill, the only sign of emotion breaking through his calm exterior. The triplets were 2.5, old enough to remember her, young enough to forget the details. Meadow still asks sometimes why Mommy had to become an angel. "I'm so sorry," Seraphina whispered, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Whatever resentment she might have felt about his success evaporated in the face of such loss. "Thaddeus, I'm so sorry." He turned to look at her fully then, and she saw grief in his eyes, but also something harder, something that looked like armor. "Don't be. She gave me 3 years of happiness I never thought I'd have. She gave me 3 children who are the center of my world. She taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or expensive things. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The words landed like stones in Seraphina's stomach, because she hadn't shown up. She'd left when it got hard. She'd walked away from their marriage because Thaddeus couldn't give her the life she thought she deserved. And now he stood before her having built an empire from the rubble she'd left behind. "Mrs. Ashford?" A waiter appeared at her elbow. "Your husband is asking for you. It's time for the first dance." Mrs. Ashford. The name sounded wrong, foreign. She looked past the waiter to where Kenton stood at the edge of the dance floor, his expression unreadable, but his jaw tight. He'd been watching them. He knew she'd been talking to Thaddeus instead of being with him on their wedding day. "I have to go," she said to Thaddeus, though her feet felt rooted to the floor. "Of course. Enjoy your dance." He nodded politely, already turning back to the window, dismissing her with the same casual indifference he might show a stranger. Seraphina walked to the dance floor on shaking legs. Kenton took her hand without warmth, pulling her into position as the orchestra began to play their song, some classical piece his mother had selected. They moved across the floor in perfect synchronization, the product of 6 weeks of dance lessons that had cost more than Seraphina's first car. "What were you two talking about?" Kenton asked, his voice low enough that the surrounding guests couldn't hear. "Just catching up," she said automatically. "For 15 minutes? At our wedding?" His grip on her waist tightened. "Do you have any idea how that looked, Seraphina? My bride spending our cocktail hour in an intimate conversation with her ex-husband while I'm greeting guests alone?" "I'm sorry. I just needed to understand." "Understand what? How he went from poverty to a Rolls-Royce?" Kenton's laugh was bitter. "I did some research while you were busy. Thaddeus Mercer. Sold a patent for $97 million, invested wisely, now worth an estimated $340 million. Rather impressive for a construction worker. $340 million. The number made Seraphina dizzy. "Did you know?" Kenton demanded. "When you sent him that invitation, did you know he was wealthy?" "No," she said honestly. "I thought he was still struggling. I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't admit that she'd wanted him to see her triumph, her escape from the poverty that had defined their marriage. "You thought you'd parade your new life in front of him," Kenton finished for her. "My mother said it was crass when you suggested inviting him, but I thought it would be entertaining. I didn't realize the joke would be on us." His words stung because they were true. She had wanted to parade her new life. She had wanted Thaddeus to feel small and left behind. Instead, she was the one who felt diminished, who saw her designer gown and her 6-carat ring and her new husband, and wondered what any of it meant compared to what Thaddeus had built from nothing. The song ended. The guests applauded. Kenton released her with mechanical politeness, and they were immediately separated by well-wishers wanting to congratulate them, by friends wanting photographs, by the relentless machinery of a high-society wedding reception. Seraphina endured it all, smiling until her face hurt, but her attention kept drifting to the back of the ballroom where Thaddeus sat with his children. She watched as he cut Meadows' chicken into bite-sized pieces, as he wiped sauce from Calloway's face with gentle efficiency, as he listened intently to something Hawthorne was explaining with wild hand gestures. He was so present with them, so entirely focused, in a way she couldn't remember Kenton ever being with anyone, including her. Delphine Ashford descended on Seraphina during the salad course, her champagne-fueled curiosity finally overcoming her social restraint. "Darling, you simply must introduce me to your friend, the one who arrived in that extraordinary vehicle. Kenton mentioned he's your ex-husband? How absolutely fascinating. You never mentioned you were married before." "It was a long time ago," Seraphina said, feeling trapped. "Well, clearly it ended amicably if he came to your wedding. How refreshing. So many divorced couples harbor such ugly resentment." Delphine's eyes glittered with gossip-hungry interest. "And those darling children, triplets," Kenton said. "The poor man raising them alone. His wife died, I understand?" "Yes." "Tragic. Simply tragic. Though I must say he seems to be managing remarkably well. That suit is Tom Ford, unless I'm very much mistaken. And the watch. Did you see the watch?" "My late father had one just like it. Cost him $160,000. Seraphina felt ill. "Please, excuse me. I need some air." She fled to the terrace, gulping in the cool autumn evening, trying to calm her racing heart. The fairy lights strung across the garden blurred through her tears. She'd made a terrible mistake. Not just today, but 3 years ago. She'd abandoned Thaddeus when he needed her most, when he was on the cusp of something extraordinary, because she couldn't see past the immediate struggle to the man he was capable of becoming. And now he'd become that man without her. He'd built an empire, found love, created a family, and moved on so completely that he could sit at her wedding with perfect composure, while she fell apart inside. Beautiful night, isn't it? Seraphina spun to find Thaddeus standing in the terrace doorway. Behind him, through the French doors, she could see the nanny entertaining the triplets with a card game at their table. "Why did you really come?" The question burst from her. "You said you almost didn't. You could have ignored the invitation. Why put yourself through this?" Thaddeus stepped onto the terrace, maintaining a careful distance between them. "I told you. Evangeline would have wanted me to make peace with the past." "That's not the whole truth," Seraphina said, and she was crying now, past caring about her makeup or her dignity. "You came to show me what I gave up, didn't you? You came to prove that you didn't need me, that you became successful in spite of me, maybe even because I left." "Is that what you think?" For the first time since he'd arrived, she heard genuine emotion in his voice. "Sarah, I came because when I got your invitation, I realized I was still carrying anger. After 3 years, after everything I'd built, after losing Evangeline, I was still angry at you for leaving, and I didn't want to be that person anymore. I didn't want my children to grow up with a father who harbored bitterness." "So this is closure for you," she said flatly. "Yes." He said it simply, honestly. "And maybe I wanted you to see that I'm okay, that the man you left behind isn't someone you need to feel guilty about. I survived, I thrived. You don't owe me anything, Sarah. Not apologies, not regret, nothing. We both moved on." But that was the problem, wasn't it? He'd moved on. She'd just moved sideways, trading one form of security for another. Never actually growing or changing or becoming more than she'd been when she left him. "I made a mistake," she whispered. Thaddeus shook his head. "You made a choice. We both live with our choices." "Seraphina." Kenton's voice cut through the night. He stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "What's going on out here?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Thaddeus was just—" "Leaving," Thaddeus finished smoothly. "I need to get the children home. It's past their bedtime." He nodded to Kenton. "Congratulations again. Take care of her." He walked past them both, back into the ballroom. Seraphina watched through the glass as he gathered his children, as Meadow wrapped her small arms around his neck, as Hawthorne and Calloway took his hands. They walked toward the exit together, a complete unit, a family that didn't need her and never had. The Rolls-Royce's engine purred to life. The car pulled away, its taillights disappearing down the long drive, and Seraphina realized, standing there in her wedding gown beside her new husband, that she'd just made the second biggest mistake of her life. The first was leaving Thaddeus. The second was marrying Kenton. The honeymoon in Bali was a carefully choreographed performance of happiness. Seraphina posted pictures on social media of pristine beaches and infinity pools, of candlelit dinners and couples massages, each image a testament to a perfect life she didn't feel. Kenton spent most of his time on conference calls with his hedge fund, barking orders at subordinates, while Seraphina sat alone on their private villa's terrace, watching the ocean and thinking about hazel eyes and 3 small children she'd never see again. They returned to Philadelphia 2 weeks later, to the brownstone Kenton owned in Rittenhouse Square. It was beautiful in the way museum exhibits were beautiful, untouchable, holiday, designed for admiration rather than living. Seraphina moved through rooms filled with furniture that cost more than cars, her footsteps echoing on marble floors, and felt more alone than she had in the cramped studio apartment she'd shared with Thaddeus. At least there, poverty had given them a common enemy. Here, wealth had stripped away any pretense of struggle, leaving nothing but the hollow reality of 2 people who barely knew each other. The first real fight came 3 weeks after they returned. Seraphina had been unpacking the last of her things when she found it. An old photograph tucked in the back of a book. Her and Thaddeus on their wedding day, standing on the courthouse steps. They'd been so young, so absurdly optimistic. Thaddeus had been wearing his only suit, the one that didn't quite fit right. She'd worn a white dress from Target that cost $37. They were laughing at something, probably at themselves. At the audacity of 2 broke kids promising forever. She was still staring at the photo when Kenton walked in. "What's that?" he asked, and there was an edge to his voice that made her instinctively hide the picture behind her back. "Nothing. Just old memories." He crossed the room in 3 strides, plucking the photograph from her hand before she could stop him. His expression darkened as he studied it. "You kept this? A picture of you and him?" "I forgot I had it. It was in a book I hadn't opened in years." "Throw it away." "Kenton." "I'm serious, Seraphina. Throw it away. You're my wife now. There's no reason to keep mementos of your failed marriage to some construction worker." The dismissive way he said construction worker made something snap inside her. That construction worker is worth more than your entire family now. Or did you forget the $340 million net worth you were so impressed by? Kenton's jaw tightened. Is that what this is about? You're having buyer's remorse because you found out he got rich after you left him? That's not... I didn't... But she couldn't finish the sentence because it was partially true, and they both knew it. "Let me be very clear about something," Kenton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I married you because you were beautiful and charming, and you fit into my world in a way that would please my mother and my colleagues. But make no mistake, Seraphina. You are replaceable. There are 100 women in Philadelphia who would take your place in a heartbeat. So if you're going to spend our marriage pining after your ex-husband, I suggest you leave now before this gets more complicated." The words hit her like a slap. She'd known, on some level, that Kenton's love was transactional, conditional. But hearing it stated so baldly, so casually, made the reality unavoidable. "I'm not pining after anyone," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Good. Then prove it. Throw away the picture. She looked down at the photograph in her hands, at Thaddeus's genuine smile, at her own radiant face, at the happiness that had been real even if it hadn't lasted. Then she walked to the trash can and dropped it in. Kenton nodded with satisfaction and left the room. The moment he was gone, Seraphina dug the picture out of the trash and hid it in her nightstand. The months that followed established a pattern. Seraphina attended charity luncheons with Delphine and the other society wives. She hosted dinner parties for Kenton's business associates. She smiled and laughed and played the role of the perfect Ashford wife. But at night, when Kenton was asleep or away on business trips that grew increasingly frequent, she found herself searching for information about Thaddeus. It wasn't hard to find. He'd become something of a media figure in engineering and business circles. There were articles about his foundation system being used in major developments across 3 continents, interviews where he discussed sustainable construction and his plans to expand into affordable housing. Photographs of him at charity events, always with the triplets, never with a date. One article in particular haunted her. It was from a parenting magazine, titled, "Single Father of Triplets Discusses Love, Loss, and Moving Forward." The interview had taken place in his home, a modern but warm-looking house in suburban Connecticut, a far cry from the penthouse or mansion Seraphina had imagined. The photographs showed Meadows' artwork on the refrigerator, the boys' soccer trophies on a shelf, family photos covering every surface. "People ask me if I'll ever remarry," Thaddeus was quoted as saying. "The truth is, I'm not sure I believe in that kind of love twice in one lifetime. Evangeline was magic. What we had was magic. I'm grateful I got to experience it at all. Most people never do. My focus now is on being the father my children deserve and building a company that can make a real difference in how we construct safer, more sustainable communities. That's enough for me." That has to be enough. Seraphina had read that paragraph 17 times, each time feeling something inside her crack a little more. 6 months into her marriage, she ran into someone who had known both her and Thaddeus during their marriage. Larkin Whitmore had been a co-worker at the dental office, and she spotted Seraphina at a cafe in Center City. "Seraphina Blackwell, or I guess it's Ashford now, isn't it?" Larkin rushed over, pulling her into an enthusiastic hug. "I saw the wedding photos online. Absolutely gorgeous. You landed yourself quite a catch." "Thank you," Seraphina said automatically, gesturing for Larkin to join her at the table. They chatted about nothing for a few minutes before Larkin leaned in conspiratorially. "I have to tell you, I saw Thaddeus a few months ago. Your ex? He came into the office with his kids. One of them needed an emergency filling." Seraphina's heart stuttered. "Oh? Girl, he has changed. I mean, he was always good-looking under all that construction dust, but now? Wow. And those triplets, absolute angels, even though you could tell the little boy with the cavity was in pain. Thaddeus was so patient with him, so gentle. Dr. Morrison was thoroughly charmed." "That's nice," Seraphina managed. "But here's the thing that really struck me," Larkin continued. "He was in the waiting room and I went out to say hello to catch up. I mentioned that I'd seen your wedding announcement, and you know what he said? He said, 'Good for her. I hope she's found what she was looking for.'" Not bitter, not angry. He genuinely seemed happy for you. After everything you two went through. After how hard that divorce was on him. "How hard it was on him," Seraphina interrupted. Larkin looked surprised. "You didn't know?" "Sarah, he was devastated when you left. Absolutely wrecked. He came into the office about a month after you filed, needed a tooth pulled. Couldn't afford anything but the extraction. No implant. He looked like he'd lost 30 pounds. Dark circles under his eyes. Shayla from billing said he'd been working double shifts at 3 different construction sites, trying to keep up with the bills." Seraphina felt the room tilt. "I didn't know it was that bad." "Well, you wouldn't, would you? You were gone." Larkin didn't say it unkindly, but the words still landed like stones. Anyway, it all worked out for him in the end. That's what matters. Though I have to say, seeing him with those kids, seeing how he is with them, he would have been an amazing father. It's a shame you two never had children. After Larkin left, Seraphina sat in the cafe for another 2 hours, staring at her untouched latte, feeling the weight of every choice she'd made crushing down on her chest. They never had children because she'd been on birth control the entire marriage, because she'd told herself they couldn't afford a baby, couldn't bring a child into such poverty. But the truth was darker than that. She hadn't wanted to be trapped, hadn't wanted another chain tying her to a life she was desperate to escape. If she'd stayed, if she'd just given him those 6 months he'd asked for, would those be her children? Would she be the one Thaddeus spoke about in interviews with that tender tone? Would she have been the magic he'd found instead of Evangeline? The thought was poison, but she couldn't stop drinking it. 8 months into her marriage, Delphine hosted a fundraising gala for the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It was the social event of the season. Black tie, exclusive, the kind of event where fortunes were spent on single tables and political careers were made or broken. Kenton had insisted they attend, had been particularly focused on impressing a group of potential investors who would be there. Seraphina wore a burgundy gown that cost $18,000. Her hair had been professionally styled for 4 hours. Diamonds that weren't hers sparkled at her throat and wrists, on loan from Delphine's personal collection. She looked like she belonged in this world of wealth and power. She felt like an imposter. The gala was already in full swing when they arrived, the museum's grand hall transformed into a glittering wonderland. Seraphina was making small talk with a senator's wife when she heard Delphine's voice rise above the general murmur of conversation. "Thaddeus, how wonderful that you could make it! I was so hoping you'd be here." Seraphina's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, already knowing what she'd see. Thaddeus stood at the entrance in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and he wasn't alone. On his arm was a woman who took Seraphina's breath away. She was stunning, early 30s with rich brown skin, natural hair styled in an elegant updo, and a smile that lit up her entire face. She wore a simple but gorgeous emerald gown and carried herself with effortless grace. The triplets weren't with him. This wasn't a family outing. This was a date. "Delphine, thank you for the invitation," Thaddeus said warmly. "May I introduce Imani Morrison? She's a professor of structural engineering at Penn." "How lovely," Delphine gushed. "And you two are—" "Friends," Imani said, though the way her hand rested comfortably in the crook of Thaddeus's arm suggested they might be more than that. "Thad and I met at a conference last year. He's been gracious enough to guest lecture for my students a few times." Kenton materialized at Seraphina's side, his hand possessive on her waist. "Mercer. Didn't expect to see you here." "The museum's new wing is being built using my foundation system," Thaddeus explained. "They were kind enough to invite me to celebrate the project." "How convenient," Kenton said, and there was an undertone in his voice that made Seraphina cringe. Thaddeus's expression didn't change, but Imani's eyes sharpened with intelligence. She'd picked up on the tension, was clearly trying to understand the dynamics at play. "Seraphina," Thaddeus said politely, "you look well." "Thank you. You too." The words felt like glass in her throat. "It's nice to meet you, Imani." "Likewise. Thad has mentioned you're from Philadelphia originally. Have you been to any of the museum's new exhibits? The contemporary art section is absolutely breathtaking." Seraphina shook her head, suddenly feeling uncultured, unsophisticated. "Not yet. I've been meaning to." They made painful small talk for another few minutes before Delphine swept Thaddeus and Imani away to introduce them to other guests. Seraphina watched them go, watched how Imani laughed at something Thaddeus said, how he leaned slightly toward her when she spoke, the easy intimacy of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "Well," Kenton said. "That was awkward." "Shut up." "Excuse me?" Seraphina turned to face her husband. "I said shut up. For once in your life, just be quiet." She walked away before he could respond, heading for the museum's terrace where she could breathe, could think, could fall apart without an audience. But she wasn't alone for long. "I thought I might find you out here." Thaddeus's voice came from behind her. Seraphina whirled around. "Where's your date?" "Powder room. I have maybe 5 minutes before she comes looking for me." He stepped closer, his expression serious. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." "What?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Let me go." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. "I can see it every time we're in the same room," Thaddeus continued. "You're looking at me like I'm some kind of answer to questions you shouldn't be asking. But I'm not, Sarah. I'm not your road not taken. I'm not your escape from a marriage you're unhappy in. I'm just a man who loved you once, and then learned to live without you." "Thaddeus." "I'm happy," he said, and she could hear the truth in it. "Imani makes me laugh. She challenges me. She's brilliant and kind, and the triplets adore her. I'm not saying she's Evangeline. No one will ever be Evangeline. But she's something new, something good, and I'm not going to sabotage it because my ex-wife is having regrets." Tears streamed down Seraphina's face, ruining her makeup, and she didn't care. "I made a mistake. Leaving you was a mistake. Marrying Kenton was a mistake. My whole life is a mistake." "Then fix it," Thaddeus said simply. "But fix it for yourself, not for me. Leave Kenton if you're miserable. Find work that fulfills you. Build a life that makes you happy. But leave me out of it. I've done my healing, Sarah. I've moved forward. You need to do the same." "I don't know how," she sobbed. "Yes, you do. You're stronger than you think. You always were." He reached out, and for one moment she thought he might touch her face, might offer her some comfort. Instead, he took a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "Clean yourself up. Don't let Kenton see you like this. Men like him use vulnerability as a weapon." Then he turned and walked back into the gala, back to Imani, back to his new life that had no room for Seraphina in it. She stood alone on the terrace, Thaddeus's handkerchief pressed to her face, and realized that she was going to have to make a choice. She could keep living this beautiful, hollow life with Kenton, playing the role of Mrs. Ashford until it destroyed her from the inside out. Or she could find the courage to walk away, to start over, to build something real even if it meant being alone. But before she could decide, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m., Rittenhouse Square Park, Southwest Bench. Come alone. This is about Thaddeus, and you need to hear what I have to say. Imani Morrison." Seraphina stared at the message, her heart pounding. What could Thaddeus's new girlfriend possibly want to tell her that required a secret meeting? Seraphina didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Kenton in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling while her mind spun through 1,000 possibilities. Why would Imani want to meet her? What could she possibly have to say that required secrecy? Kenton had been furious when they left the gala, accusing her of embarrassing him by disappearing, by crying on the terrace like some hysterical child. They'd fought in the car, his words cutting and precise, designed to wound. When they got home, he'd poured himself a scotch and retreated to his study, not emerging until morning. At breakfast, he acted as though nothing had happened. This was their pattern now. Fight, ignore, pretend. Repeat. "I have lunch plans today," Seraphina said, pushing eggs around her plate. Kenton didn't look up from his Wall Street journal. "With whom?" Larkin. From my old job. It was a lie, but she'd become good at lying, good at pretending, good at being someone she wasn't. Fine, don't forget we have dinner with the Vandermeers tonight, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. She arrived at Rittenhouse Square Park 15 minutes early, her stomach a knot of anxiety. The November air was crisp, the trees mostly bare. She found the southwest bench and sat, watching people pass by. Joggers, mothers with strollers, an old man feeding pigeons, normal people living normal lives. Imani arrived exactly at 2, carrying 2 paper cups from a nearby coffee shop. She wore jeans and a camel-colored coat, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked approachable, real, nothing like the polished society women Seraphina had become accustomed to. I got you a latte, Imani said, sitting down and handing Seraphina one of the cups. I figured you might need it. Thank you. Seraphina accepted the coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Why did you want to meet me? Imani was quiet for a moment, watching a squirrel dart across the path. Because I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but the same feeling. And because Thaddeus is a good man who deserves better than to be caught in the middle of someone else's unfinished business. Seraphina flinched. I'm not trying to— Yes, you are, Imani said gently but firmly. Maybe you don't mean to, but you are. And I need you to understand something before this goes any further. She turned to face Seraphina fully. Thaddeus and I are not dating. The words hung in the air between them. What? Seraphina breathed. We're friends, good friends. We met at a conference, bonded over our work, and he's been incredibly generous with his time and expertise. My students love when he comes to lecture. The triplets think I'm fun because I taught them how to build model bridges. But we're not romantic. We've never been romantic. But at the gala, you looked like a date? That was intentional. Imani's expression was kind, but serious. Thaddeus asked me to come with him because he knew you'd be there. He wanted you to think he'd moved on completely. He wanted to convince himself he'd moved on completely. Seraphina's heart was pounding so hard, she could barely hear over it. Why are you telling me this? Because 3 days ago, Thaddeus came to my office and told me he can't do this anymore, can't keep pretending. Can't keep running into you at events and acting like his chest doesn't feel like it's caving in. He told me about the wedding, about your invitation, about how he thought seeing you marry someone else would finally kill whatever he still felt. Imani's eyes were compassionate. It didn't work. If anything, it made it worse. Seraphina felt tears streaming down her face. He said he was happy. He said he'd moved forward. He's trying to be. He's trying so hard, Seraphina. For his kids, for himself. But the truth is, you were his first love. You were the person he built his dreams around. And even though you left him, even though he found happiness with Evangeline, even though he's built this incredible life, there's still a part of him that wonders, what if? Then why isn't he here telling me this himself? Because he's terrified, Imani said simply. Terrified that if he tells you how he feels, you'll use it as an excuse to blow up your marriage without actually dealing with why you're unhappy. Terrified that you don't really want him, you just want an escape. And mostly terrified that he'll open his heart again and you'll leave when things get hard, just like before. The words cut deep because they were true. Seraphina had left when things got hard. She'd given up on them, on him, because she couldn't see past the immediate struggle. I don't know if I want him back, or if I just want to not have made the mistake, Seraphina admitted, her voice breaking. How do I even know the difference? That's the question you need to answer, Imani said, and you need to answer it honestly, for yourself, before you drag Thaddeus back into your life. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I brought you something. Thaddeus doesn't know I have this, and he'd probably kill me if he knew I was showing it to you. Seraphina opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were pages torn from a journal, covered in Thaddeus's handwriting. The dates ranged from 3 years ago to just last week. She began to read. 6 months after the divorce. I saw Sarah today. She didn't see me. She was laughing with some guy in a suit, and she looked happy. Actually happy, not the strained happiness she had with me toward the end. Maybe she was right to leave. Maybe I was drowning us both. 1 year after the divorce, signed the patent deal today, $97 million. The number doesn't feel real. All I can think is that if I'd had this money a year ago, she might have stayed. Then I hate myself for thinking that, because if money was the only thing keeping her, maybe we never had what I thought we had. Meeting Evangeline. She makes me laugh. Really laugh, not the bitter kind. She doesn't know about the money yet, doesn't know about Sarah. She just knows me as the awkward guy at the bar who spilled champagne on his tuxedo. I think I might be ready to try again. After Evangeline's death. The triplets asked why I don't have pictures of their first mommy in my room like I have pictures of their second mommy everywhere. How do I explain that I loved Sarah differently? That she taught me I could survive heartbreak, which prepared me to survive this. That even though she left me, she made me strong enough to love Evangeline fully, without holding back? 6 weeks ago. Got the invitation today. My hands shook when I opened it. She's marrying into the Ashford family. She got everything she wanted, money, status, security. I should feel vindicated, should feel like I won by becoming successful without her. Instead, I just feel sad. I'm going to the wedding. I need to see her happy. Need to believe that all the pain meant something. Last week, I can't stop thinking about her. It's been months since the wedding, and I still catch myself wondering if she's happy, if Ashford treats her well, if she ever thinks about me. Imani told me I need to let it go or do something about it. But what can I do? She's married. She made her choice. I need to respect that, even if it's killing me. Seraphina's tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink. He still loves me. Maybe, Imani said. Or maybe he loves the memory of who you were together. Maybe he loves the idea of what could have been. The question is, do you love him? Really love him? Or do you love the man he became after you left? I don't know, Seraphina whispered. Then figure it out, Imani said, standing. But I'll tell you this. If you decide you want to try again with Thaddeus, you need to leave Kenton first. Not for Thaddeus, but for yourself. Leave because you deserve better than a marriage that makes you miserable. Leave because you're brave enough to start over. Leave because staying is slowly killing who you are. What if Thaddeus doesn't want me back? Then you'll survive, just like he survived you leaving the first time. Just like he survived losing Evangeline. We're all stronger than we think we are, Seraphina. We just have to be brave enough to find out. Imani walked away, leaving Seraphina alone on the bench with the journal pages and the weight of an impossible decision. She went home. Kenton was already there, surprisingly, standing in the living room with a tumbler of scotch. He looked at her with cold assessment. Where were you, really? What? Larkin called an hour ago, said she was hoping to reschedule the lunch you apparently never planned. His smile was cruel. So I'll ask again. Where were you? Seraphina could have lied, should have lied. But something in her had fundamentally shifted. She was tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of being afraid. I was meeting with someone, a friend of Thaddeus's. Kenton's expression darkened. Of course you were. You know what? I'm done with this. I'm done with you pining after some ex-husband who got lucky with a patent. I'm done with you making me look like a fool. Then let's be done, Seraphina said, and the words felt like freedom. Excuse me? You heard me. Let's be done, Kenton. You don't love me. You love the idea of me, the trophy I represent. And I don't love you. I married you because I was running away from poverty and loneliness, not because I actually wanted to spend my life with you." His face went red. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll get nothing in the divorce. The prenup—" "I don't want anything," she interrupted. "Keep it all. The house, the money, the lifestyle. I just want out." She went upstairs and started packing. Kenton followed, alternating between threats and pleading, but she barely heard him. She threw clothes into suitcases, grabbed her important documents, took the photograph of her and Thaddeus from the nightstand. An hour later, she walked out of the brownstone with 3 suitcases and her car keys. She had no plan, no destination. She just knew she couldn't spend another night in that beautiful prison. She drove to a modest hotel near the airport, checked in, and sat on the bed in the quiet room. Then she pulled out her phone and typed a message before she could lose her nerve. "Thaddeus, this is Seraphina. I left Kenton today. Not for you, but for me. Because Imani was right. I need to figure out who I am and what I really want before I can be fair to anyone, including myself. I don't know if you still have feelings for me, or if too much has happened for us to ever find our way back to each other. But I needed you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because you became successful, but because I gave up on us when I should have fought harder. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for so many things. I hope you and the triplets are well. I hope Imani finds someone who deserves her kindness. And I hope that someday, maybe, we can at least be friends. Because you were right. We both deserve happiness. I'm finally brave enough to try to find mine." She hit send before she could overthink it. The response came 30 minutes later. "Sarah, I'm proud of you for leaving. That took courage. Here's what I think we should do. Let's not talk for 6 months. Use that time to figure out who you are outside of any relationship. Build a life that makes you happy. And then, if you still want to, call me. We'll get coffee. We'll talk. We'll see if there's anything left worth rebuilding or if we're better as a memory, but only if you've done the work to know yourself first. The triplets send their love." Meadow insisted I include that. She remembers you from the wedding and says you were very pretty like a princess. Kids are better judges of character than adults sometimes. Seraphina read the message 17 times, crying and laughing simultaneously. 6 months. She could do 6 months. She spent the next days finding a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, reaching out to old contacts about job opportunities, making plans to finally use her business degree. She filed for divorce, endured Kenton's fury and his lawyer's threats, stood firm on wanting nothing but her freedom. She had coffee with Larkin and confessed everything. She volunteered at a women's shelter, helping other women who felt trapped. She went to therapy and cried through session after session as she unpacked years of choices made from fear rather than hope. She learned to be alone without being lonely. She learned that she was stronger than she'd believed. And every night she looked at the photograph of her and Thaddeus on their wedding day. 2 broke kids who'd promised forever, and wondered if sometimes, when you're brave enough, you get a second chance at getting it right. 5 months and 27 days after she left Kenton, Seraphina sat in a coffee shop she'd chosen carefully. Not too fancy, not too casual. Neutral ground. Her phone sat on the table in front of her. Tomorrow marked 6 months. Tomorrow she would call Thaddeus. If he still wanted to hear from her, if he was still willing to try, if love really could survive everything they'd been through. She picked up her phone, opened a new message. "Tomorrow is 6 months. I've done the work. I know who I am now. I know what I want. And Thaddeus, if you're willing, I'd really like that coffee. Not because you're successful, and not because I'm lonely, but because I finally understand what you tried to tell me 3 years ago. that real love isn't about money or status or perfect timing. It's about showing up for each other, especially when it's hard. I'm ready to show up now. The question is, are you? Sarah. She hit send. And then she waited, her heart full of hope and terror in equal measure. For a man in a Rolls-Royce with 3 beautiful children to decide if a woman who'd once given up on him deserved a second chance at forever. The response came 3 minutes later. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the cafe where we had our first date. You probably don't remember it. Little place in South Philly, terrible coffee, amazing conversation. I'll be there. Alone. The triplets have already planned what questions to ask you if things go well. Hawthorne wants to know if you like dragons. Calloway wants to know if you can braid hair. Meadow wants to know if you believe in happy endings. See you tomorrow, Sarah. Let's find out if we do. T. Seraphina pressed the phone to her chest and let herself cry. Not from sadness or regret, but from the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that sometimes the story you thought was over was really just beginning. She'd arrived at her wedding in a Vera Wang gown to marry the wrong man. Maybe tomorrow, in jeans and a simple sweater, she'd walk into a coffee shop and find the right one had been waiting for her all along.